My wife told me I need to make some housewarming gifts for our good friends, so of course I said, yes, wife, you're right, wife, I'll do it. And we're gonna go ahead and make 2 of these platters. They are around 9 inches wide by a little under 2 inches tall with 3 pounds of clay. I'm gonna show you how to do it in 2 different ways, so if that's something that you wanna see, stick around and find out how we do it. So we have the rolling pin that we've used in other videos to flatten and make discs. You can make platters and plates with it. We're going to put that away. And we're going to go over the more traditional way on how to make these platters using 3 pounds of clay. So let's clear this area and let's get started with centering this guy down. So as always, we roll the clay, hit it on the board, and start pushing down and get it stuck. And you can hear a slight wiggle, so I'm going to get a bat mate to get this stuck so it doesn't do that. So these are called bat mates. They're from Glazing. They're basically just chamois material. And what it does is it helps to stick your board to the wheel, or any object to the wheel in general. And that jiggle can make it more difficult for you to center your piece. So by putting this material down, I shouldn't get that jiggle. And the board should be nice and stuck. So this will be posted in the Amazon storefront if you want to pick up your own. And you don't have to get the Glazing brand because that's the name brand. You can get cheaper ones. But right there, a lot less jiggle. All right, anyway, let's get this centered. And basically, we are making a flat disc. So the centering process is generally the same. You sew cone up, you sew cone down. But this time we're going for a more flatter, wider centered piece rather than a taller dome. But centering still more or less the same. Cone up, cone down. Try to get all those wobbles to go up and then down. There's still some slight wobble here. So another way that I was showing my students how to get it centered, if just the bottom is slightly off, one little tip I have for you folks is when you do the karate chop to cone down, you can actually do this to cone up. So with the karate chop, instead of just pushing down with my right hand, I'm pushing forward with my left. You can see the clay rising up a little bit, and then I'm going to push back down with my right. So by doing that, I'm pushing the base up and making it rise, and then my right hand will push it back down. If it's still a little off, we repeat that. So push forward with my left, and then I push back down with my right. So you basically are alternating the pressure. Forward with the left, diagonally down with the right, and you keep repeating that until this is centered. So right there, a little closer to being centered. But I'm just going to cone up and down one more time, just to be safe. So really squeeze at the base, get those wobbles to rise up. And the way I like coning down, I don't do the karate chop very much anymore. I mostly just push forward with my left hand. So this can also be done with your right, but I am left-handed, and I'm going to engage at the base here with my sponge hand and my fingers on my left hand to then get it flattened. All right, so I have my disc, and my goal is to flatten this out to get the width of what I want my base to be. And so this is normally where you get the rolling pin, you can press it down and make it flat, but this is another method, I call it the hammer push, to get this flat. And it's very similar to the rolling pin, but you're just using your hands. So for the hammer push, or hammer compress, basically you just make a fist with one of your hands, either or, left or right, doesn't matter. And you're going to brace up against the clay with one hand, and then the fist hand is going to be pushing down in the center, and then you're slowly bringing it towards your body. And then my hand that's supporting is then going to give way to the pressure, and then just kind of let it fall over. So as this one pushes down, my left hand kind of gives out to ensure that this doesn't mushroom out too much. Just by doing that, you can see that it is already starting to mushroom out. There's an overhang, so I can take my sponge in my right hand and apply downwards pressure and then push that down and into the bat. And then I just repeat that same method until I get this to the width and the thickness that I want. So if you are left-handed, or you rather use your left hand, same thing. You can push down with both hands if you want to. And you're just bringing it towards your body. You can have a sponge in your hand too, so you can squeeze that as the clay gets dry. And then the benefit of using two hands is as you get closer to the edge, you then tilt your hand up and let that then compress the side. Okay, so you just keep repeating, push, and slowly bring your hand out. Okay, so I think that's the easier method if you are trying this for the first time. Hold your hands together and then compress and then bring your hands out. So this is called the hammer compression. And you're just doing this until you get this completely flat. So right now I have a mound here, so I'm going to continue pushing. This time I'm using my right hand to push. And slowly bring it out. So I'm going to stop right here so you can see this little crater that's developing. And basically this is acting like a wave. You're pushing down, and as you pull towards your body, it's having the clay lift and rise up. Like this is the wave forming. So if I keep bringing it further and further towards me, that wave of clay is going to get taller and taller if I don't compress it down. So it's really important as you bring that wave of clay closer to your body, you are compressing it down into the board so it doesn't basically flare up and crash over itself. Now, thickness. Thickness of the clay that I like for a platter to get the most of the clay is you want to go about 1/2 inch thick. If you go any thinner, you can't really trim a foot and the piece may lift up and warp. If you go any thicker, you can make a tall foot, but your piece would be kinda narrow because a lot of the clay you're going to trim away. So I think 1/2 inch is that good medium. So just really feel the clay as you go out. You don't want it to rise and fall. And you're just making this really beautiful disc. You can then bring in a rib if you want to further compress. So you have this wooden rib. And then on the center here, you don't want to compress directly in the center because the rotation of the wheel is going to rotate this. And of course I'm getting crumbs on this. So you want to place it off of the center, so at the right of the center at 3 o'clock, and apply light downwards pressure. And then what I do is I push down and I slowly lift it up. And I slide it outwards. So you can really feel where the clay is high or low. And it does take away some of the layers of the clay. Mostly this is slip. So you can pull that off and then put it to the side. And then you can check for thickness. We'll grab the needle and then see how thick it is. And if the clay is too thick, we will thin it out a little more. So I got my needle. Let's go ahead and check for thickness. Stab it in and pull. So we are a little more than 1/2 inch, so I can go a little thinner. And that will allow me to make a bigger piece and not have to trim as much. So it's really up to you on how thick you want to get this. So we'll continue that hammer push. Push down. So just by pushing, you already see that indent forming. And then pull towards your body. Or if you rather see the movement, you can push down with the sponge and then slowly slide the sponge outwards towards 3 o'clock or pull it towards you. But I do prefer your fist because this is easier to control and it covers a little more surface area than the sponge. But see which one works best for you. Just make sure that if you do that, have the sponge in your other hand so you can easily apply moisture as needed. Okay. And then now I can feel it rise and fall. There's a high spot here, so I'm going to go back and then compress as needed with the sponge. So I'm really feeling the clay. And so you must be wondering, how am I going to transform this disc into the platter over here? And so what you're going to do is you're going to take your clay and we're going to start pushing the clay on the side here to make this rise up. So we're kind of doing it in inverse or reverse. So we establish the base and then we work on the wall. Normally we dig and then pull out to create the wall, but this time it's a little different. And so one cool thing about this technique is if your outside is not perfectly centered, what you can do, mine's is decently centered, but pretend like it's off center. You then take your needle and then you drop it down on the outermost edge of the clay and you do it all the way down until you hit the board. And once you hit the board, you can cut away that strip of clay that's not even. And hopefully if you ever do this, you do it better than me and not let it go halfway. And what is left is a perfectly centered disc of clay. And so it's really important to make this outermost edge as centered as possible, because as we're pushing it inward to make the clay rise up, like that wave we're talking about, if it's uneven, it's going to rise more in the part that has more clay. So really important to even it out. And I haven't thrown in a while, so I'm really messy today. Anyway, so we're going to take this clay. Now to make this bump up and rise. In my other video, we got a wooden knife, we cut underneath and we lifted it up. I'm not a fan of that. I rather use the sponge and compression. So take your sponge. At 3 o'clock, you're going to gently wrap the sponge over the edge. So one finger will be on the disc, another finger will be on the side where the board meets the disc. And we're going to use our hands like this and push it inward. Kind of like if you ever played with a tech deck and you have your fingers like that riding it. So it's going to be like this. Your middle finger, the finger on the farthermost outside, is going to be pushing in. So it looks something like this. So actually, I'm going to switch sponges so it's easier to see. I got these smaller sponges that I just cut these ones in half. Anyway, place it on top. Now my middle finger is going to be pushing the most, and that is causing the clay to rise up. My pointer finger here is compressing the clay down a little bit so that as the clay goes inward, it rises up, and my pointer finger that's pushing down on it is making sure that it stays compact. Okay, and I just keep doing that until I get the clay to either the width I want the bottom to be, or enough clay here where I can then play and lift and pull. So this part is all about personal preference. I like getting this to about 1 inch tall by 1 inch thick. That gives me a good amount of clay to work with. So once again, drape it over. And now that it's taller, I can actually just put my pointer finger on out here. My left hand is doing the compression down and it's moving it inward. So the sponge is just wrapped over this clay, and you can see that it's starting to turn back into a plate, more or less. And so if I wanted a plate, this is basically set up where I just thin this out, pull it a little bit, and flare. But I'm making a platter, so I want this a little taller and a little thicker. So I'm just going to keep going, get a little more beefy. And the more I push inward with my middle finger here, the thicker it's going to get. And so base-wise, I want this to be about 8 inches wide, so we're pretty close, because from my pinky to my thumb is about 8 inches. I'm going to go a little more, about 7.5. That way I have more clay to play with. And there we go. I got my clay relatively thick here. It did thicken up a little bit on the base, so I could go thinner here, but we'll leave it for now. And so now this is set up to pull my walls up. So when we pull, this is basically the same way we pull like we always do. Compress the clay between our fingers and lift up. Whether you do it with the sponge, the knuckle, the pinch and pull, it's really up to you. But for something that's kind of tiny like this, I prefer the sponge and my pointer finger, side of my finger against the sponge, and I'm just compressing, so like this. Compressing like that. And as I compress to the left and the right, you can see the clay start rising. And so I don't want to push this bottom section inward anymore. I want to start lifting it up to get a clay wall to then flare it to create the platter. So as I lift up, as always, release the pressure. When I get about this high, so right at the top, I release the pressure and I let my fingers kind of just catch up. I let the clay catch up to my fingers. And then we're going to go ahead and compress the lip here. And then thickness of your rim. Because I'm going to flare this out even more, you want to make sure that your rim is not too thin. I say a good 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch thick is perfect. So I'm actually going to compress this down a little more to closer to 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to go ahead and do another pull. So this time when I pull, I'm going to pull and shape to start creating the curve. And that way I can start establishing this nice inner curve and really feel the clay wall. And so this time I'm going to push this bottom in a little more to create an undercut. And I'm going to push outwards with my left finger to start creating this bump out. So this little undercut here is basically establishing where my foot's going to go when I trim. And this bumps the clay up. My left finger is pushing the clay out. And then I can actually start doing a pull where I'm pulling out diagonally. And then right around here, I start releasing the pressure. And I'm going to keep the rim more or less that thick, because I'm still going to stretch it out a little more. And I don't want it to thin out too much. Okay, so let's feel for thickness again. I can do another pull. I'm not going to push in too much at the base this time. Just kind of compressing here a little more, a little above the base, and I'm going to add a little more volume So this pull that I just did was a shaping pull. So I compressed and I kind of went out and then up. So I'm liking the shape so far. I'm going to compress the lip a little bit, round this out because it is getting a little too wide, a little too triangular at the top. And then now I'm going to bring in my rib. And of course it's all crusty, so let's go ahead and rinse that. And I'm going to add a little bit of roundness to this. Checking for size, we're about 9 inches wide and a little over 2 inches. So I'm going to flare this out a little more, and it's going to shrink in height a little bit. And so I'm using the curve of this tool to match the inside of the piece. Or actually, the curve of the tool is going to then form the piece. So this curve initially, this bottom section, is pushing out the clay wall, so everything against the clay is touching the wooden rib. And we're going to go ahead and start from this side now. I'm going to work on this transition right here. Kind of remove anything that's not needed and slowly work my way up the clay wall. And then stop when I get to the rim. All right, size-wise, we're about 2 inches tall. About, well, what am I doing? I'm just going to use the ruler. So we're about 9 3/4 wide by 2 inches tall, and this is going to shrink a little bit. And I am more or less happy with this shape. So I'm just going to get the sponge. I'm going to kind of feel the inside. It feels pretty compressed. The transition feels nice and gentle. So just to be safe, I'm going to compress this middle a little more. So using this tool now, apply pressure and then slowly bring it out. And then on this outer edge, I'm going to rotate it so it's a little less dramatic. And I'm going to work that transition up the side and then soften this transition line here. So it's kind of like trimming. So it's usually best to compress before you do the final shaping because it may mess up your transition from floor to wall. And it's kind of hard to fix sometimes without trimming it. All right, and if I play with this anymore, it's probably going to collapse because this angle is pretty dramatic. And so the last thing, I'm going to get my gross little chamois that's really dry and crusty. Get that nice and hydrated. And we're going to round the rim, soften it, and then we're going to move on to the second way to make a platter. All right, there we go. We'll create the little groove at the base and wire it off. If you're enjoying these videos, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way it helps to grow this little channel and you can see the videos being released every week. All right, there we go. Let's pop this off and get our second piece. All right, got our second 3-pound piece of clay. Let's go ahead and get this started. So that first method is the slightly easier way to make plates or platters, and that's just compressing the whole thing into a disc. Now, this next method is the method that my teacher in high school taught, and the reason why I've never made plates in high school was because this technique just looked way too difficult to understand, and you'll see what I mean once I start developing it. But setup is always the same, still cone up, cone down, get it centered. And this time we're not going to flatten it into a disc. We're going to basically get our mound like how we normally would if we're throwing a bowl or a vase, and we are just going to start digging our well. So we'll go, this one is about 5 inches wide, a little more narrow than a normal piece, and then we'll dig our well to that same thickness that we're aiming for, so that 1/2 inch thickness. Okay, we're going to go ahead and open our well. And then right around here, once we get our inside wall vertical, we are actually going to start pulling this clay outwards. And so as I do this, you're basically transforming this donut into a flat disc by pulling the clay and compressing it down at the same time. And so the reason why this was so hard to understand was because as I tried it myself in high school and I pulled, I would always not compress down enough to then get it back to the board. And so when you guys do this, do it slowly. And I do recommend trying to get any water off the board, or at least thick slip off the board first. Make sure you don't have any skirt. And the method for this, you basically are putting your first hand, left or right, doesn't matter, on the clay so that this part is compressing down, and then your other hand is on top of that hand, and this will be pushing down as well. So both hands are pushing down. Once you feel the clay compress, then you're pulling towards you to then lay this down, basically flatten this into the board. So I'm actually going to change position, so I'm going to be moving to here so that this will be my midnight, so it'll be easier to see how it flows outwards as I'm doing this compression. Okay, so I shifted my body. This is my midnight right here, and I'm going to be compressing down and pulling towards me so you can see how the clay kind of just lays down into itself here. So once again, left hand to drape down over the top. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to use my right hand so you can see how this falls, and my left hand's going to be on top. Normally I use my left, but like I said, you can use both hands. And then I like putting the sponge in either hand so that this can then squeeze as the clay gets dry. Okay, so I'll put it in my right, and then my right hand, you can see, start compressing down, add water as needed. And then you can see that the clay is compressing down. It's looking more and more like a big donut. So I'm going to add a little more water, compress down a little more. And at this point, now the clay is basically flattening out and then reattaching to the board. And so to get the rest of this, I'm going to now pull this clay outwards by using my pointer finger and my middle finger, my right hand, and pulling that clay out towards me. And I'm going to compress with this spot again of my hand as I'm pulling it out. So you can see right here, this is where the compression is occurring. This I'm going to hold in my left hand. So the left hand sponge is touching this to get it lubricated, and my right hand's compressing down. So changing the way I'm holding it, and the compression is still more or less the same. Okay, and then because my bottom didn't flatten out completely like how I wanted to, I'll go back and then do the hammer to then flatten that out. So that way you flatten it by compressing and pulling. So I'm going to get this back into a mound so that you can see that all in one go rather than me breaking it down in multiple steps. So let's get this back into a bigger mound. All right, I got it back to the shape that it was before I started the compression. Let's soak up the water. Okay, now I'm going to do that whole process again in one motion so you can see how fast this can be for the technique. So I'm just going to flatten this bottom section out a little more because it got a little thick when I recompressed it. So going a little thinner. All right. So this time, I'm going to do the same compression, but I'm going to drape the sponge over the wall to help keep it lubricated because I had to keep adding water. So here we go. You can see that's my left hand, right hand on top, compress down. My pinky is engaging and squeezing this edge. So as I compress, both hands are pushing down, and now I'm pulling towards me to bring this clay wall outwards. Right around there, I'm going to stop. You can see how much faster that was. And then to get this clay wall and to get this base completely flat again, I can just use a sponge to really drive that clay outwards. Get it back to one big chunky part here. Compress this just like how I did the first plate by pushing from the outside to get that clay wall thicker. And then thickness wise, we want that 7.5 inch width. So I went a little too far. So let's compress this down a little bit. Push this in. So a little more. And there we go. And like I said, because this wasn't completely flat from my compressions, we're gonna go and grab the rib and compress it now. So off the center, compress down, flatten that one more time. There we go, nice and flat. And now let's go ahead and pull and shape. Get rid of that skirt. Add some water. This time I'm squeezing the clay with my right hand here. And I'm lifting. So it flared out a little bit already. That was the first pull. Compress, make sure it's nice and flat still. There we go. And now the shape and pull at the same time. So push in at the base, push out from the inside, and then start pulling up and getting that roundness. All right, there we go. Release the pressure. Look at the sizing. And let's get that ruler again. And size-wise, it was 9 3/4, so pretty much on the dot. Height, about 2 inches, so we basically got the shape in 2 pulls this time. Now I'm just gonna refine it, add a little more volume to the outside, using the rib. And now this is all extra. You don't need to do this. It's more personal preference. I just wanted more rounded, especially because I did a little more on the other one. So supporting the bottom here, because I know if I push too much downwards with my inside hand, it may collapse on itself. And I'm going to thin the rim out just a tad bit. All right, I think that looks pretty good. There's a slight bump here in the transition section, so let's compress that. Smooth, and then chamois. Yeah, chamois to compress. And this rim is a little thicker, and I prefer slightly thicker rims like this. So I'm definitely liking the way this one's thrown over the first one. And of course, create the groove at the base. And let's get this wired off and wrap up the video. And there we have it. 2 ways to make platters or plates if you wanted to. One slightly easier, takes a little longer, and one slightly harder, but is much faster. So let me know in the comments below which one that you liked better and which one you think you're going to want to try out. And in the videos to come, I'm going to show you guys how I like trimming these guys. 2 different styles, of course. So one, the traditional way on trimming, so you get a nice big wide foot. And another one for extra support, if you're a little worried about the middle slumping, so that we have this inner part to then ensure that this stays flat. And we're going to round out this short series with how I like glazing these bigger pieces. So if that's something that you folks want to see, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can see those videos when they are released every week. And of course, I want to give a big mahalo to the Mud Club members and a shout out to the Mud Club Plus members. We have JJ Kiss, Michelle Zhu, and James Oates. And once again, for the Mud Club Plus, send me an email or reach out on social media so I can start sending you guys all of the perks that you guys have unlocked in that tier. And hopefully, I see you folks in the next video as members as well. So until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you folks in the next video.